Scene one, Apple, take one.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shane Borza. Welcome to another episode of Film Notes, the show where I talk to people in the industry about the industry, and I get their notes on not only what they're doing, but how they came to do it. I'm excited today to have a new friend. I always like it when I get new people that I haven't spoken to recently on the show. This is Emmy-nominated Paul Epstein, who is both an executive producer and a showrunner. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things he's worked on, as well as how he got to become not only in that position, but to receive those nominations. So, Paul, thanks so much for being here today.
Oh, thanks, Shane. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Now, we were chatting a little bit before we started recording about how you started in indie film and how you have kind of transitioned to where you are now. So talk to me a little bit about the history of how you got into the industry. I know one of the kind of the jokes in the industry is no two people get in the same way. So not only how did you get started, but was this a lifelong thing? Did you fall into the industry by accident? How did you get into, the industry at all?
Thank you, Shane. So I probably got started in independent film the way many people do, which is starting off as a production assistant on a independent feature that some friend of mine mentioned that they were working on, and I had never done it before. I was in New York. I was an aspiring writer. I still am, I guess. I had been a bartender for a while, and I was between jobs, and I thought, well, that sounds kind of cool. And I think the funny part of the way I started in this is that the very, very first thing that almost anybody said to me on my first day on a film set was said to me by the assistant director of this independent film. And he looked over and said, could you hand me an apple box? And so I literally started looking around for a box of apples because I didn't know what an apple box was. And I was looking around and he laughed at me and he goes, what's that thing? And so that was kind of the first actual memory I have in independent film. I fell in love with the film set just almost immediately. Almost the first or second day I was on this very small indie film. I think the thing that really clicked on for me was the camera dolly, because I saw the grips come in and start laying dolly track for a Pee-wee dolly, and they were leveling it, and they carried in the dolly, and they put the camera on the dolly, and I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. I was just so intrigued by it. And then I guess probably the thing that was most likely the icing on the cake, I was pretty hooked pretty quickly. But in this independent film in New York City, it was a romantic comedy, and there's a love scene where the guy and the girl, they finally kiss, and it's raining in New York at night, and we're shooting in the village, and we got permission, the production got permission from the city to tap into a fire hydrant, which is how you get water for rain scenes in the city. And so again, this is a very small indie film. It's like a 25-person crew. And the AD basically hands me a giant wrench and says, go ahead and open that fire hydrant. And I went and I opened up the fire hydrant. And I thought to myself, I'm here on a movie in New York City. I'm opening a fire hydrant. We're going to make it rain. It was quite beautiful. Everything about it appealed to me. And I landed on my role in independent film almost immediately. On the first couple of days on the set, I was like the super PA. I was very energetic and focused and motivated, and I tried really hard. And everybody from different departments in the film were saying, oh, Paul, you would be, you should get in the camera department. You'd be a really great camera PA. You could be a good camera assistant. And the art department was saying, oh, you should be a prop master. You'd be a really, really good prop master. And people in production were like, you should consider production. You're pretty smart. You're pretty organized. But almost from the very beginning, I just thought to myself, no, I know what I want to do. I want that guy's job. I want to be the first assistant director. And he and I were good friends for a very long time after that. And he gave me he became my mentor, and he helped me figure out what an AD does and really helped point me in that direction. And I just loved everything about what this AD was doing. He did a really good job, and he's a good AD. And I thought that's the role that would suit me best. That's what I want to do. And on my very next film, I think I was a second AD. And then on the third film, which is just a couple months later in the summer, the DP of the first film said, hey, Paul, I know you want to be an AD. I'm shooting another indie feature. I bet you'd be fine. It's not very big. Why don't you be the AD of that? And that was my first time. And so within 3 or 4 months of even setting foot on a film set, I got the chance to be an assistant director. And that's the only thing I ever really did in films. I eventually AD'd, I think, 35 feature films, indie features, most of which are fairly forgettable. Most indie films, frankly, are pretty forgettable. The ones that you see, the ones that win Sundance, the ones that make it to big festivals are really great. But for every one of those, there's many more that just really don't turn out very well. I was AD of many of those. All of them were excellent experiences, loaded with good people, excellent experiences to learn how to make films, learn how to work in the industry. In addition to working on all these features, I was the AD of about a dozen commercials, 4 or 5 music videos, and a whole hodgepodge of a variety of other kinds of content and film and TV and stuff that fit into different categories. I did that for a while. I did it for about 10 or 12 years. I joined the Directors Guild of America. I'm a DGA AD, even though I haven't worked as an AD for a long time. After a certain period, I got the opportunity to work in unscripted TV, in a factual TV series. In around 2011, I got the opportunity to work in a documentary TV series on History Channel that turned out to be a fairly legendary History Channel franchise that lots of people have heard of, called The Men Who Built America. And it went on to win all kinds of Emmys and all kinds of awards. And it spun off a number of franchises. They're still kind of making the Something That Made Built America series even as of a couple of years ago. They've done The Cars That Built America and The Food That Built America and then This and That That Built America. And it turned out to be a really great franchise. I did pretty well with that series because I brought all of my filmmaking expertise to the show. The show is very cinematic. And when we say documentary, it's not necessarily just talking heads and archival material. The series filmed a lot of very cinematic, very high production value, dramatic sequences to dramatize the stories of its characters. It's all about the industrial titans of the Gilded Age in America in the 1880s and 90s. So it's about people like Cornelius Vanderbilt and Andrew Carnegie, and how the robber barons and these brilliant and driven industrialists really created the American Industrial Revolution and all these great inventions and all the great processes, and all about the conflicts between them, probably more exaggerated than they really were. So when you're watching the show, you do see experts will pop up and give commentary. You'll see some archival material. You see a little bit of graphic material. Mostly what you're seeing is dramatic recreation, as we call it in nonfiction TV. And it's really pretty cinematic. And I was able to bring all my filmmaking skills to that production because I knew what they were trying to take on was going to be very complex and very difficult and very ambitious. And I feel like, having had the experience of an AD in feature film for quite a while at that point, I was able to help make the production run well and run efficiently, and just, again, running it from top to bottom like a small movie, I think was the right thing to do. And it turned out to be a very, very successful series. And again, it went on for quite a while. Since then, I continued working in nonfiction TV almost exclusively, really ever since then. I got my chance to work as a producer on a series called Gunslingers, again, a nonfiction historical documentary series about American gunfighters of the Old West, guys like Billy the Kid and Wyatt Earp and Wild Bill Hickok. I worked on that series. I was on the American Heroes channel, and for season 1, I was the assistant director. And again, I brought all the filmmaking sensibility to it, which I think helped the company and the executive producer kind of get through what was for them the first time they had done anything in a kind of large scale cinematic way. There was a learning curve there that they learned quickly and learned well, and how to do things in the movie way. And in the second season, I got the chance to produce and direct 2 episodes. And since then, I've been just producing and directing more and more in nonfiction. And I very quickly became a supervising producer. Then I got the chance to become an executive producer and a showrunner. And over the years, I've had the opportunity to both create shows that have gotten on the air, and I've been hired as a contract or freelance employee to run shows that other companies have set up and created, sometimes a combination of both. And so I've been the showrunner of I don't know, probably 10 different projects at this point. I've been the co-executive producer of many more. And I continue to work as a consulting producer, as a co-EP, sometimes as a director. Sometimes I work really just as a writer-producer on a show. And I do a lot of show development. I create projects, and I try to get them set up with networks. And so that's a matter of understanding how the networks operate, understanding what the market is looking for. It's probably the subject of a whole other podcast, which I'm happy to do. And so that's what I do most recently. My most recent project is a series called The Tall Tales of Jim Bridger. It's actually a scripted series. It's a Old West series, a frontier era series about a real American frontiersman named Jim Bridger, a well-known historical personage from the 1840s, 50s, and 60s. And we tell fictionalized stories about his adventures they're all based closely in historical reality. We tell stories about Jim Bridger that could have happened, and we're careful to make sure that we don't do any episodes or tell any stories in which he meets Bigfoot or somehow tries to stop the Lincoln assassination or sees a UFO or anything like that. Everything that we tell in the story are things that could have happened in historical context, but we fictionalize his life to a certain degree. And that's the most recent thing I've been working on. It's on the INSP network. It's a basic cable channel that specializes, and really it's an Old West channel. They show lots of syndicated Old West shows like Gunsmoke and Bonanza and The Rifleman, and they have some originals as well, including the show.
We actually have a lot of parallels there, which is funny, but I think it also speaks to, regardless of what level you're at, how we all have to wear multiple hats. Like you were talking about the writing and the directing and the producing and the show running, and how each of these things leads to kind of perfecting or uplifting the next project. Like, oh, because I had the experience of doing this, I'm able, like you mentioned, bringing that cinematic scope, or helping to look at the show like a mini movie. The reason I say the parallel, so I went to film school and stunt academy in Australia. I lived there for 3 years, and I fell into ADing, and then that's all I did for 3 years was AD. Mm-hmm. And so I always laugh with people and go, well, I have about 200 credits as an AD, and the good bad thing about that is sometimes you're on a music video for one day, but it's like a 20-hour shoot,
right?
And those are sometimes worse than the 5-day shoots, because
right.
You don't get a lot of time to prep, and you have to try to cram everything in. So I always say I used to AD, but I don't anymore because it's very, very difficult to do. But it does really help you understand what each department does and how to have those departments work together. So as you were talking, one of the things, part of this is the introduction to the people that someone may not have heard of, but also kind of the education of how people not only move around in the industry, like you start in a certain role, you end up in a different role, or what have you. But talk to me a little bit about how you perhaps now are able, and sometimes this only happens in reflection, but looking back, how were all of those roles helpful to you? How are you now able to perhaps be more flexible between different positions, or able to look back and see, as I mentioned, oh, I'm so glad I was able to do this role because that's helped me do what I'm doing now.
So looking back at all the roles I have held in both film and TV, I can easily see how one of them compounds and supports the next one as I go forward. I would say probably the most important thing I did in my career that really shaped my career as it is now, where it's going, I hope, in the future, is working as an assistant director. There's really practically no role on a film set where you have a better window into the inner workings of a film. There are lots of people work on films, or lots of people have specialized responsibilities and skills. A lot of them are very, very creative. Most of the jobs on a film set are very difficult and take a lot of dedication, a lot of motivation. But as an assistant director, you really see how each person on the film contributes their part to what the film is going to be. From obviously the director, obviously the cinematographer, but also the production department, the production designer, the costume designer, the makeup artists, special effects people, stunt people if you have them. Everybody contributes their thing. They all do their thing for the film. And as an assistant director, you have to kind of understand what everybody's role is and what they're contributing. And you need to figure out how to help them contribute in the maximum possible way. You want to help them do their part as best as they can. And in my view, it's mostly by clearing obstacles out of the way. It's like making their jobs as easy as possible to do. So whoever you are on the film set as AD, I feel like my job is I'm going to help you do your job and do it as well as you can. So that way everything happens efficiently. Everybody gets to do the part they're supposed to do, and it all contributes to the whole. And so ever since then, I've learned that it's just the best possible school for filmmaking. So I learned about efficiencies on film set. I learned about working under pressure. I learned about having to make hard, fast decisions, how to improvise. Basically, especially in independent films, every day on production, you say company's in, and you kind of are falling down a flight of stairs until you say that's a wrap. And all day long, it's just a series of like, that didn't quite go as planned. What do we do now? Or this is really interesting. How do we do more of it? Or we have to adapt to a situation. We're running out of light. It's raining when we weren't expecting it. Just if you've been an AD, you know what I'm talking about. It's just a nonstop series of questions and puzzles and situations to sort out one after the other. Some of it is as easy as the PA saying, "Where do I put this cooler?" I use this illustration all the time. The AD's job is just to say, "Put it there." It doesn't really matter. Just somebody needs to tell somebody else, "Put the cooler over there," and the PA puts it down. On the other hand, you have to make like really incredibly difficult decisions that'll affect how the whole film is going to go. And so you'll make scheduling decisions that'll basically determine how much time any given scene is going to have in a film. And that can make a really big difference to the overall film. Individual scenes make up the whole mosaic of the film. You know that as well as I do. And you know that having enough time to do everything is the biggest challenge of any film, and certainly for independent films. So you're constantly having to weigh the amounts of time you have available to you and decide how to use them. Do I use more time for the scene that's right in front of us and hope that we can make up enough time that we have enough time for the end of the day? Or do we rush through the scene that we're doing now to make sure that we have enough time for the scene that we have to do at the end of the day? And you're just constantly juggling those things. And so as an assistant director, you get the most close-up possible view on how a film production works. And that has been invaluable to me at every other stage of my career. I see very, very clearly how anything that gets written in a script or a treatment or in the written content of any kind of show that has to be produced, I can see very, very clearly what is required to make it happen and make it look good. And I know very clearly when things are too big for the production to take on. I know when things are going to be too expensive for a production to take on. I know how to kind of manage the creative versus the reality of what the show can accomplish. And I can always look for ways to tell the story of the show or the project in creative and compelling ways that the production part can actually manage. It's always a matter of trying to fit the creative of your show, your film, your project into the available budget, and not necessarily always saying, well, I want to do X, Y, and Z. I need to get more money. Most of the time, there's not more money. There's always a good way, though, to tell your story with less money if you stop and think and you're resourceful and you can really focus on the essence of what the story is and the key dramatic elements and the key character moments and find interesting, smart ways to linger on those and focus on those. And if you do that kind of thing well, you get the maximum value out of the budget you have. You get the maximum use of your time, and you're doing things on the set that you can do well, and you can really make look good, and you can get the best possible performances out of, instead of simply always racing through it as fast as you can and always thinking, oh, geez, I just wish I had more money for something. All this stems from my time as an AD on low-budget indie films, and it really informs everything I do in the industry today.
I can, again, parallel a lot of that. And I think one of the key takeaways, a lot of people feel like, well, if we had more money, it would solve the problem. And that can make things easier, not only because you might have just maybe it's just more hands-on set. You have a bigger crew, or you have better equipment, or what have you. Maybe you can afford an actual department instead of just like a guy or what have you. But it also brought to mind one of my favorite. I'm a big fan of Robert Rodriguez, and one of the things he says is, "I love when people bring me a problem on set. It forces me to create a solution."
Mhm.
And he talks about how, if 6 months ago I had an idea and 6 months later I got exactly what I wanted, there was no growth or change. It's just, I wanted to do this and I got it. So he really embraces those restrictions, because he'll go, "Ooh, you know what I never thought of until you brought me that problem is this new idea." And that is where, he always wants to elevate it and not have it, lessen or get worse. But that's to him where that creativity, I had this idea, and now that we're here, we're going to change it and make it even better.
Mhm.
And so if we have that and we can bring it with us, these are the intangible skill sets that we have in our pockets that we bring with us, set to set, project to project. Sorry to stop the show, but we've got some bills to pay around here. And to do that, I wanted to point out a couple things I've got on offer at shaneborza.com. As both a master level mental health coach and an award-winning filmmaker, I have the experience and expertise to help you go further faster, regardless of whether that is in your production or life. I am psyched to announce all my courses and books have been updated and expanded and are available on both Apple Books and at my shop. Especially wanted to point out my film notes book and workbook, where you can learn everything you need to make your film and get it out to the world. If you need help with either your life or film, please reach out. And now, back to the show. Now, I did want to shift a bit. I know that you have been vocal about some safety concerns and asking some things to be changed, especially in regards to the fallout of the Rust program. And my parallel to that is, as I mentioned earlier, I went to a stunt academy, so I'm used to working with safety officers, with and you mentioned props, like the weapons people, the stunt coordinators, and all that. And there's a lot of things that go on, like daily safety briefings and making sure that we have the time. And that's another thing I want to just touch base on, where you're talking about where you have to make the choices between where to go faster and where to go slower. And sometimes you have to get everybody to sprint, so you can then slow down and say, we have to get this shot just right because it's getting shot during the sunset or wherever. So we're sprinting, and then we're all stopping. And a lot of that comes in where we have to make these choices amongst safety sometimes, where it's like, well, we don't have time to do the big complicated jerk back scene with the rig and the fall and the whatever, but what's the fastest, easiest thing we can do that keeps the stunt people safe, for instance. And unfortunately, when we have something like Rust happen, where I don't know exactly what decisions were made or not made, but something didn't go right, and then we had this kind of tragic outcome. So talk to me a little bit about where we're trying to make some changes in the industry for safety and establishing some of those things that may have been overlooked or weren't paid attention to.
I was horrified by the tragedy of the DP and the director being shot with a real bullet on the film Rust, and of course the DP Sonia Hutchins dying from that injury. It was an extraordinary tragedy, and it's gotten quite a lot of press. It's getting mainstream front page news, like on the Times, New York Times, LA Times, certainly all the trade magazines, even Nightly News covers it. And I think that's because of the big name involved. There was Alec Baldwin, of course, was holding the gun that fired and caused a fatality. So it's certainly something that is near the top of my mind all the time. Because in my projects, I've been doing so many Old West projects over the past several years. We do all kinds of blank fire weapons kind of on a daily basis. There's quite a lot of shooting in these Old West stories. Both in the show Gunslingers that I mentioned, again, it's all Old West shoot 'em ups. And in my shows Into the Wild Frontier and The Tall Tales of Jim Bridger, again, no shortage of gunfights and shooting and stuff. So it's something on a day-to-day basis that I deal with. And I've done it as an assistant director and as a director and as the EP showrunner who's also directing his show. So again, my experience as an AD about managing safety on set has really deeply informed me as a director and as a showrunner. I just automatically know how to do things the right, safe way. And I also know that there is no choice but to do them that way. So in my mind, it's never a debate in my mind of, I would love to do this. I know it's a little bit unsafe, but maybe we can just get away with it. I just never think that. I always think to myself, we have a scene that's got a risk factor in it. I can judge fairly well what the risk factor is, and I just know that we have to allocate time and resources to make sure that risk is managed. Almost always, in my case, that means deferring to the safety expert who's associated with that. So if it's a stunt, someone's going to jump off a bridge or be hit by a car or something like that, the stunt coordinator and the stunt performer, if they're two separate people, are going to be the ones ultimately making all the safety decisions about how to do that. If I'm directing, I'll have an opinion about how I want it to look or what I want it to feel like or what I'm trying to do or how I want to cover it. But I'm never going to be the one dictating to the stunt team how to do it. They're going to tell me what they can do safely. And in my point of view, my job is to say, I agree, I understand. With things like gunfire on sets, my habit relatively quickly became telling the armorer, I'd like to tell you what I'd like to do with this shot. I'd like to tell you in the story what's going on and how I want to cover it is where I want this guy to be standing here with the gun and that guy standing over there, and then the shooting to go in this fashion, et cetera, et cetera. You tell me how I can do that. Can I point the gun this much this way? And he'll say yes or no. And I'll say, well, tell me where it's safe. And he'll say, okay, that's going to be safe. And I'll say, fine, that's what we're going to do. Or if it's just not a safe situation, if he says, I'm sorry, the way you're blocking this, these two people are going to be standing too close together. You can't really do a safe gunshot at any angle. I'll say, got it. Let's just change blocking. Let's figure it out. What if they're standing this far apart? There's always going to be a way to do something that's going to be satisfying and cool. The best way for me to do it is just to make sure that the person who's going to be ultimately giving me safety judgments about things understands what I'm going to be doing and that they feel empowered that I'm going to agree and listen to them. And so in the safety meeting every day, when I talk about these things, I'll say, our armorer is so-and-so. He's going to make all the decisions about what is safe or not safe with the guns. We're not going to debate with him and we're not going to argue or try to talk him into anything. If he says that's not safe, we're going to say, okay, we agree. How about this? And we'll get to we'll get to a collaborative agreement that way, but we're never going to try to talk somebody into it. So in the case of Rust, I should point out that this kind of tragedy is remarkably rare. It's an extraordinarily unlucky event. It's something like, how the Titanic sank in its way. Like a million things had to go wrong for all these things to happen, get to the point where Alec Baldwin was holding a pistol on a film set with a live round in it. The idea that an actual bullet, a fireable bullet, is in a weapon being used as a prop is just practically inconceivable for anybody who works in the film industry. Although it is a fear, it is a risk that we're always very cognizant of. And we should note that all day long in the United States and around the world, film productions and TV productions are doing gunfire scenes constantly. And the incidents of injuries are really quite rare. And certainly the injuries of fatalities are, again, almost unheard of. So it's interesting to think about how many things had to go wrong in the sequence of events that led up to Alec Baldwin, again, holding that pistol and by all accounts, pulling the trigger. I think that when it comes to, sorry, let me rewind a little bit. I have been talking to people and writing about the need for maybe a different level of safety supervision on film sets. And I think it is most acutely needed on low budget and indie films. Not because, I want to be clear, not because they're by definition independent or low budget automatically equals unsafe. I don't mean that at all. I think most indie films are really pretty safe. Most amateur films are certainly safe enough, but not all of them are. And it's mostly a function of time and budget. Big budget productions can afford the time and afford the staff and afford the luxury of practicing and rehearsal and even gun safety boot camps for the actors and that kind of thing that low budget films and indie films can't afford. And so kind of the lower the budget, the more amateur the film, the less likely it is you'll have a fully experienced person in certain key roles. What most people maybe don't understand about filmmaking is that there's really no ticket for entry. You don't need any permission or license or permit in a large sense to make a film. You and I, Shane, could decide, hey, let's go go out to Nevada in the desert and let's make a Western. And hey, I've done lots of films. I'll be the armorer and I've got a gun. Let's just use that. And like, no one's going to stop us, except for the fact we both know better than do that. But anybody who wants to make a film is allowed to make a film. And so if anybody listening, won the lottery or saved their money or had that $500,000 that they wanted to make an independent film, a hostage drama with a shootout at the end, nobody's going to stop them. Nobody can prevent them from doing that. You do need film permits from the community for parking and the permission to use public areas and permits to film in most communities, but no one is really monitoring the safety of any of that. Risk factors go far beyond the things that are obviously risky, like stunts, like high fall stunts and car chases and shootouts and things. On a film set, there are risk factors every day that are just sort of par for the course of any film set. All day long, the crew is loading heavy stuff off of their vehicles and into locations and out of locations again. All day long, the lighting department are hanging heavy lights above actors and heads, the crew members' heads in sets in various places. They're constantly going to work in a place they've never been before. Often they'll be filming in places that are not occupied. They'll be filming in a derelict warehouse or an untenanted building for various reasons. You want to film in these places either because they have the correct, derelict look that you're looking for, or simply because there isn't a tenant there and you can use it. And you can rent it from the owner. So a lot of places you may wind up filming may have built-in safety factors, like rickety stairwells or uneven flooring or low ceilings or a fire escape that maybe hasn't been inspected for a while. Just all day long, you're kind of going into places that are not the same thing as going to one's job every day in the office, where there is fire code and there's occupancy codes and there's safety drills and that kind of thing. It's just, I don't want to give the impression that every film set is just a wild west of dangers all day long, but it is different than when you go to work at an office or at the shop or at the store or something like that every day, where you're just doing the same thing every day. The AD's job is to manage all of that workflow all day long to make sure that people aren't rushing and they're not going to places that are unsafe and that are not, pushing the boundary of what's risky or not. In the case of Rust, it seems like the culture of the film, every film has its own little culture, was one of haste and urgency. And it's pretty well documented that Alec Baldwin, who's one of the producers of the film, contributed to this sense of urgency and haste by being demanding and insistent about things moving quickly. And I've seen behind the scenes video from the film of when you can see Alec Baldwin yelling cut, or after the director saying cut, saying, come on, let's go again right away. I'm ready. Let's go. Just a couple of days ago, the LA Times was reporting on the prosecutors of the Rust trial, flagging reports that Alec Baldwin was acting unsafely or acting irresponsibly in the very few safety meetings they had about guns, in the few safety training sessions they had with guns. He apparently was distracted. He was apparently looking at his phone. Apparently he's kind of goofing off and mugging with the guns and stuff. So in that situation, you have a low budget production, which is stressed for time to begin with. You have a crew which is being pushed to work quite hard because of that budget. So they're working long hours because this film doesn't want to go over schedule. Because the film is low budget, they found cheaper accommodations for the crew that are farther away. So a lot of the crew is having to drive pretty far between shoot days to get to and from their accommodations. There were a lot of apparently complaints from the crew about working conditions and about turnaround time and just a general sense of it being unsafe. So this feels like risk factors were accumulating and building up and were going unresolved. Now that kind of thing in this case resulted in, again, in a otherwise unthinkable tragedy, but elements of those conditions occur on film productions all over the place all the time, especially on low budget ones where time and budget is the paramount factor. So I've been suggesting that probably states would be well advised to have a safety supervisory body in which once you have a film permit to film in your locality, there's at least one inspection by a safety authority, a safety official that comes and makes sure that the people that are going to be responsible for the various safe risk factors on the film really are qualified enough. I mean, that would mean the states would need to come up with a qualifications standard for an armorer, for a key grip, maybe the person in charge of rigging lights, for animal wranglers, for anybody who's doing anything that's going to, have a risk factor associated with it. And that person would have, the state would have to send out somebody to kind of double check that the people, that the crews that the production said were being hired were actually on set that day, and that they weren't doing things were not safe. Most states don't have any kind of regulatory agency in that regard. But again, it goes to what I was saying a moment ago, how if you work in an office or you work in a factory, you work in a warehouse, there is OSHA. There are safety codes for the buildings. There are safety regulations for workers at places, mandating respirators and so forth. And there are places that you can call. There are hotlines you can call when something is unsafe. And there are complaints that you can make. Independent films, low budget films, there's really nothing like that. Union productions, again, unions are usually more common on bigger budget shows. The craft unions and the production crew unions do exert some safety and risk management over productions when in their contracts, and they actually will often have representatives come out to productions and just check things out. But again, if you're in a non-union production, it means you don't have that oversight, and you may well wind up with working with less experienced people that are trying to make their way into the industry. I just want to stress again, I'm not trying to say that every indie film or amateur project is unsafe or is inherently dangerous, because it's definitely not the case. But the lower the budget, generally speaking, the lower level of experience across the board of the people involved with it, and that gets down to the student film level, where people in film school or anybody who wants to make a student film, and I encourage everybody to do that. They might be doing it for the first or second or third time and might not have very much experience, but people are ambitious, filmmakers are ambitious, and they might think, well, I'm doing my student film, but I really want to have a cool car chase scene, and maybe I could just kind of do it. Or my brother took a driving safety course, or maybe he used to be a cop, he's done high-speed driving, you'll kind of just let him do it. Nobody's watching, nobody's gonna know until a bad thing happens, and then it just turns into what happens with Rust, prosecution, criminal investigations, that kind of thing. So it's kind of a long way around the barn to make the point that in the case of Rust, a lot of the risk factors compounded each other in a way that resulted in a very, very, very unlikable but tragic outcome. But a lot of those risk factors are present on many, many other productions, and it's not impossible that this kind of thing could happen again. And I do think that one way to mitigate this is some kind of governing safety authority, probably at each state's level, that does something to check that productions are behaving responsibly and are hiring the right people for the right jobs.
I'm glad that you went in depth on all the different aspects of that. And again, it was something I was really excited to talk to you about, because with your background of, historical reenactment, especially like you mentioned, a lot of those gunfighter shows. I mean, my kind of stunt background was in Sydney, and like Australia has very strict, they don't really have gun culture. And so even though I worked on a feature called Battleground, which is a World War I like trench warfare movie, so you have 50 extras lined up in trenches with rifles over the bayonets and stuff. All that stuff is fake. I don't think we had a single real weapon in the entire production. Now, that being said, we had lots of explosions because you have the mortar fire, and we had to do the trigger traps where you have an explosion going off and someone goes and they hit the thing and it bounces them into like the pool of water or whatever. So for us, it was more about handling the safety and having to do a grid map. Like, where are the explosions at? Where are the people at? What's the minimum distance? You know, how can we make sure, you know, we cheat with camera angles like you were talking about with the armor, you know, where are people at? So it's all blocking and everything. So we just sidestepped the weapon issue. So for me, it was interesting. Okay, so for someone who does those kind of productions, especially doing them here, both in the indie and in the union world, because as you mentioned, those are very different things. You know, what was that like? So that was very valuable to me, and I hope people do take. And I think you balanced it very well of like the challenge and the rising to like. I mean, that was me in film school. Like, I want to do stunt action movies. How do I do that? So we had someone come in and give us like a 2-day, you know, intro to stunt seminar, and they recommended, oh, you should reach out to so and so, which became the stunt coordinator that I ended up working with and all that. So I found the right people to mentor me and train me up properly, even though I was doing these low budget student and indie productions. And then I was able to work with them on their productions. And at first, it was kind of the PA version of like, I'm moving pads in and out of the van. That's all I was doing. Right. But over time, I was able to go up in the ranks, and we did like 3 features in a row, back to back in Sydney. So I was able to learn like on the ground and see how things are done properly. So now when I'm doing my own things, I'm like, oh, I do it like this because that's the way. But if you don't know that, I mean, there's nothing wrong going in your backyard, like you said, and be like, okay, we're gonna have a fight scene. Someone actually got hit in the face. All right, well now I know it's but just me and my friends. That's entirely different than if you are trying to do the fake car chase. What if you roll a car or something? So right. We have to be mindful of these things. And so I think conversations like this can be really helpful. So people can go, oh, I didn't think about any of that. I'm glad I heard that talk. Or maybe that inspires them to try to learn more about it so that when they do get on set or something, they can kind of do it the correct way. Now, I want to be mindful of our time. So I'm going to ask us to pivot to talk a little bit about what some of your notes are. When you look back at your career, what are some either things you wish you'd known or some hard-won lessons that maybe you might want to impart on other people? So a top couple notes from your film industry experience.
Well, looking back at my film and TV experience, some of the main notes I would share, and I'll start with things I wish I had known to begin with. You know, the industry can be very difficult. Most people will work in this industry as a freelancer. They'll go from project to project. And so there are periods in which you're working constantly, and there are periods in which you might be down for longer than you want. And that can be very stressful, and it can be very difficult to get through some long dry patches. So it takes a lot of resilience, and it takes a lot of self-motivation, and it takes a lot of determination and no small amount of luck to get into a really successful ongoing groove in the industry. I was lucky in the sense that I was working in New York City. I was living in New York City. And so there was tons and tons of work around. And I started off really when indie films were really just starting to get quite big, and there was lots and lots of indie films being made, probably more so than there are now. And I was able to go from show to show, from job to job relatively quickly. And I was young and freewheeling enough that I didn't mind the kind of, you know, fly-by-night nature of it, so to speak. But it would be good for people to understand that when you embark on a career like this, you will have to rely upon your own ability to generate the work and maintain the relationships and the networks that will lead you on to more and more jobs. Another thing I would say I wish I had known was, in a way, how easy it could be to be successful in this industry. Almost anybody can get into the film or TV production industry, certainly at the entry level. It's probably one of the few industries I can think of, maybe besides like food service or, you know, restaurants or something like that, or entry level retail, whatever. You know, you don't really need any qualification to get your first job as a PA on a film set. The only qualifications you need are to be, you know, pretty bright and smart and motivated and take direction well and not mind being cold and wet quite a bit, because it's PA's job. But you don't need any qualification. You don't need any specific training. You just need to decide you want to do it and get in there. And once you start doing it, you either can and should quickly decide what your route in the industry is going to be in production. I love cameras. I love photography. I want to be a DP someday. I want to go up the route of being a camera assistant, then being a camera operator and being a DP. Or fascinated by costume. I love design. I love all that goes into costume design, costume PA, wardrobe supervisor, on-set dresser, assistant designer. You can follow that route too. And for any one of the departments on a film set, there's like 8 or 9 main departments. You can start not knowing anything about it. And if you decide that you've got an aptitude and some creativity and some hustle, you can start to move in that direction. And with luck and determination, you can reach your levels relatively quickly. I knew plenty of people who I met as a camera PA or a camera assistant on some indie film. And a year later or 3 or 4 movies later, they're also already shooting someone else's short film. And a short time after that, they're shooting somebody's indie film. And then some of the people I worked with on these low budget indies are now doing Star Wars movies. They're doing, big series. I see DP names all the time. Like, wow, I knew that person as a camera assistant. Thought he was going places. Good for him, So anybody can kind of make it if you try hard. It's all based on personal aptitude, personal drive. The idea always is get on the show and the role that you want or that you can get at that level of your career, make a good impression on everybody, make a good impression on the person at the next higher level of the food chain of your department or in the industry, so that that person says, wow, Shane was great at pulling those crash pads out of the van. Let's let him set up the spring cannon next time, So like you just will move up. On the stunt coordinator who hired you to drive the van will eventually let you plan the stunts, maybe do the stunt or do part of it. And that's the same thing for every department, So it's really good to know for anybody listening who wants to pursue a career in production in film or TV that it's open to you if you want to do it. The more experience you have, the more connections you already have, the better. Obviously, if you are the son or daughter of a studio executive, that's probably going to help. But it doesn't mean that's the only way in. I would say one of the things that I didn't really expect from the industry is how far it can take me, how far it took me. When I was just starting off, I knew I wanted to be an assistant director. I had an aptitude for that, kind of a taste for it. I didn't really think at the beginning that I would eventually become a showrunner and executive producer, but one thing built upon the next. And I was able to draw upon a lot of creative skills that I always had. I loved writing all my life. I've always been a reader, so I've always loved writing. And so I was able to start writing for shows. I was able to start producing creative content for shows. And it really just built one thing on the next. So one thing I would say to people, again, who are listening or aspiring to be in this business is be ambitious about your ambitions. Really think about what it is you want to try to accomplish or what you're passionate about. And then there are ways for you to find a way to do it. You just have to find the way, but it is open to everyone. I always say to people when I speak to undergraduates, I have people I'm coming up in the business who are asking for advice about how to get started, particularly people who want to be creators, who want to be directors or producers or DPs. The best possible advice always is go ahead and make something. Just make the thing that is within your reach right now. If you want to be a director and you're a film student or you're just starting out, as you said, get in the backyard, get your friend who's an actor, get somebody who's got some lights, use your iPhone or use your 10-year-old DSLR and make something. And that gives you something to talk about with other people about. The festival circuit is a great way to make connections. It's a great way to get things you make out there, and it's a great way for you to go. It's a good reason for you to go to the festivals, and that way you meet more people. And it's always about knowing everybody. It's about who you know in the industry. That's going to give you those opportunities to move up the ladder. It's worth noting that for the most part in the industry, until you're super successful, the industry is not going to reach out to you and drag you into it. When you're still coming up and you're still you haven't had a notable success yet, you haven't really broken out in whatever that particular field you're doing is, you're going to have to scrap for it. You're going to have to really work hard to get the notice and get the attention that you're going to need. So it's always worth bearing in mind that the industry isn't going to do it for you until you get to a certain level. So when you do get to become Denis Villeneuve and you're doing Dune movies, sure, the industry is going to call you and say, Dennis, we've got this project, you want to do it. But until you get to that point, you're going to have to get the industry to pay attention. And it can be done. And I encourage everybody who wants to try it, but it is going to take effort and heart and dedication.
Great film notes there. Wanted to ask, where can people either see more of your work or connect with you so that you can perhaps showcase some of these projects that you've been on, or lead people to some things you might want them to see?
Well, if anybody is curious about the work I've done and some of the shows I've done, I sent you, Shane, my personal homepage. It's just got all of it's got my bio, it's got my my news and articles and things. It's got clips and samples from quite a few of the shows I've worked on, probably 12 or so shows. And so anybody who's curious about that can see that material. And I don't know if you'll host that in the show notes or in the podcast notes, but that might be good. I'm Paul Epstein on LinkedIn. I'm one of many Paul Epsteins, but I'm Paul Epstein, the showrunner, the executive producer on LinkedIn. You can message me there for questions and comments. I try to answer them as best I can. Anybody who's curious about my information, I'm obviously on IMDb. So all of my credits, all my work is listed there as well. So, a lot of the work I've done, is intermittently available on YouTube. Shows for INSP Network, example, they have channel. Generally you can see lots of my work on streaming channels, on fast channels like Roku or Tubi. You can see samples there and see the full episodes and so forth. So my work's out there. But again, probably the best thing is look me up on IMDb to see the specific titles. Look me up on LinkedIn if you're curious. And again, if you're able to share it, anybody's welcome to look at my homepage, and it gives all kinds of samples of my work there.
And as you mentioned, I'll make sure that those links are on the screen for those of you who are watching the show on YouTube. And if you're just listening, then you can find those links in the show notes. Want to really thank you for being here today. As I mentioned, I love connecting with new people that I don't know already. It gives me a chance to get to know them and learn more about them and their work. And for those of you, as I mentioned, who are watching or listening to the show, so this is a monthly interview show. It is on YouTube. I always encourage people to watch the show so they can see the guests and they can see some of the posters and clips, on screen. But it's also available on all the podcast platforms. So I want to thank you for following. And if you'd like to support the show, I do have a Patreon, so you can help us put more interviews like this out. And we will see you on the next episode.
Thanks very much, Shane. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to support the show, please click on the link below. You can also contact me at my website if you have any questions about filmmaking or anything else. Off to the side, you'll see a couple of my books, Film Notes and the Film Notes Workbook. I encourage you to check those out if you'd like to learn more about filmmaking. See you in the next episode.
Scene 1, Apple, take 1.